Rights is a term we use when we talk about what are the privileges or the entitlements or the protections that everybody can expect to have within a political system, within a society. Often the term human rights is used, that they are the expectations that everybody can expect, or inherent in us as human beings, that we can expect to enjoy and we should respect in other people. That's the basic system. When we look a bit more closely, there are often different kinds of rights or human rights. For instance, we might talk about civil and political rights, which are rights which relate to our ability to participate in political processes. For instance, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to demonstrate, the right to freedom of association, that is to join organisations such as parties or trade unions or pressure groups, and also the right to freedom of expression, the right to say things, to say what our view is on a political matter. So that's civil and political rights. There are also other kinds of rights you can find that some people support, that are protected in some societies. For instance, economic and social rights, which might include rights such as the right to health care, the right to employment, the right to housing. There are also further rights as well, for instance, environmental rights, the right to a clean environment, the right to access to water. So actually the concept of rights is fundamental to many political systems, actually has a number of different aspects to it the more closely you look at it, and has a number of different definitions and can cover quite a wide range of issues. And what some people might regard as being fundamental rights, such as the economic and social rights I mentioned, other people will say actually they're not rights as such. There are things that you should, if you want, pressure for within a political system, but there's a debate about how far everyone has the same basic entitlement in those areas. So it's a contested area, but rights are very important to any political system. In the UK, we have a range of provisions that are intended to protect our rights. Some of those protections go back over a number of centuries, and many of them were arrived at through a series of judgments made by the courts, which they're sometimes known as common law rights. For instance, the right not to be subjected to torture or other kind of inhuman or degrading treatment goes back a long way and was established in a series of judicial decisions over time. Other rights are protected by more recent legislation, and that one of the central pieces of legislation in that regard is the Human Rights Act 1998, which actually incorporates into law an international agreement known as the European Convention on Human Rights. The Human Rights Act 1998 provides mainly for what we see as civil and political rights, but it's an important piece of legislation, and it gives the courts a special role in the upholding of rights. There are also various other pieces of legislation that serve to protect rights. For instance, the Equality Act 2010 is designed to protect people across a series of categories against all forms of discrimination. So that's another form of right, anti-discrimination. So there are various pieces of legislation in the UK which serve to uphold rights. The difference perhaps between the UK and some other countries is we don't have, in the contemporary sense of the term, a clearly defined Bill of Rights that you might find, say, in the United States, or fundamental rights as you might find protected in the German Constitution, for instance. We don't have a Bill of Rights which has the same kind of firm legal status those documents possess, although the Human Rights Act does give the courts a role in protecting rights. They don't have quite the same authority to strike down all laws that violate rights in the way the courts in some other jurisdictions might have. So that's a limitation on the extent to which rights in the UK have firm legal protection. And actually, the way in which we provide for rights in the UK is a subject of controversy. Some people think that the way in which we protect rights should be extended, that we should have a fully justiciable, i.e. a fully justiciable Bill of Rights, i.e. a Bill of Rights that enables the courts to actually strike down all legislation that they find to violate rights. Other people dispute that and say, no, we don't need that. That would give too much power to the courts, and it would take power out of the hands of elected politicians, and also it might be abused by people who actually weren't upholding their rights but were exploiting rights opportunistically. For instance, criminals, some people would argue, would be able to use this to evade capture. Some people would argue that having too many rights could actually prevent law enforcement or security agencies from going about doing the job of protecting us. So that's one of the arguments against it. In fact, some people also argue that we've gone too far already in protecting rights, that, for instance, the Human Rights Act gives too much power to the courts, when in fact what we need to do is have more power in the hands of politicians. So this is an ongoing and complicated debate with arguments on all sides, and it's certainly going to stay with us for the foreseeable future.